united in diversity. We are very heterogeneous in our opinion.
If we do not renew our partnerships with the rest of the world, Europe will not be relevant.
We can make it if we are together as Europeans.
Do you genuinely believe that countries will manage to reach these very ambitious targets?
Thanks, everyone, and hello, good afternoon, and welcome, both online and here in a very packed room. Glad to have you here. I'm Zia Weiser. I'm Politico senior climate reporter here in Brussels, and you're watching Politico Live. So Europe's energy transition is well underway, but it remains beset by a multitude of challenges, from creaky power grids, high prices, a sluggish pace of electrification, and uncertainties about the deployment of clean technologies. Sorting out those issues is a top priority for policymakers and companies all across Europe. But, as I'm sure we'll hear today, they all have very different ideas for how to go about it. So first today, we'll sit down with EU Energy Commissioner Dan Jorgensen before hearing a variety of views from a wonderful panel. But before we begin, I'd like to thank 3M for making this event possible, and all of you, our audience, for watching. For our panel, we'll later on take some questions from the audience. You can submit your questions via Slido using the hashtag #ScalingUpCleanEnergy, and I believe there's a QR code somewhere behind me. And questions with a name and an organization attached will get priority, as always. We also want to hear your views on a poll question chosen by 3M, which is what actions should be prioritized to speed up the rollout of clean tech projects in Europe? And you can answer that as well on Slido. We look at the results at the end of our discussion, but now to kick things off, we'll hear from our partner Wendy Bauer, the President for Energy, Transportation and Electronics for 3M. Thanks so much.
Good afternoon, good evening. Welcome. I'm Wendy Bauer, Group President of 3M's Transportation and Electronics Business Group, including our focus on energy. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you during the EU Sustainable Energy Week, a time for the world to come together to focus on Europe's energy future. Thank you to the participants and especially our speakers. We have an excellent program ahead this evening, and I'm thrilled to welcome, in particular, Mr. Dan Jorgensen, the European Commissioner for Energy and Housing, and of course, all of our distinguished panelists from the Commission, the Parliament, and the industry, as well as Zia Weiser, our moderator today. The work you are doing for Europe's energy transition and energy security is vital. Thank you all. On behalf of 3M, a longtime partner to Europe's energy ecosystem, I'm very proud to introduce our event today, From Ambition to Pragmatic Reality, Scaling Up Clean Energy in Europe. According to 3M's own global research project, The State of Science Insights, countries prioritize energy security and investment in resilient, sustainable energy solutions has come into sharp focus. 75% of people believe that their governments should invest more to create jobs in the clean energy sector. Now, while regulatory frameworks like the Clean Industrial Deal are essential, we all know that legislation alone won't get us to our goals. We need speed and we need solutions at scale. This is where we see 3M adding value, translating science into impact at scale. 3M has 62,000 employees worldwide with more than 110 manufacturing sites, including R&D capabilities in 31 countries. And close to 25% of our employees are based right here in Europe. 3M also has more than 135,000 patents, with many used in energy solutions that play across the energy value chain, from generation to transmission, distribution, and efficient consumptions. A few examples. Renewable energy. Our solar films and wind blade protection support the performance and durability of the equipment. Green hydrogen. Our nanostructured catalysts are helping to scale up green hydrogen production, while our glass bubbles make sure that the storage is more secure. Carbon capture. Our advanced structured sorbent sheets or filters help to remove carbon dioxide from the air. In grid digitalization, 3M's sensors are a game changer for utility companies, providing real-time data on electric grid performance. Or data centers. Our solutions are helping to reduce their energy and water consumption as well. And more. Our scientists around the world are working tirelessly every day to develop solutions to pressing challenges in and across the energy space. As I said earlier, that legislation won't get us to our goals, and we also know that technology alone won't get us to our goals. We need collaboration with customers, policymakers, and innovators to make the transition possible. The EU faces challenges like increased energy demand, high energy prices, and grid stability, highlighted by the recent blackout in Spain and Portugal. The EU has made progress toward ambitious climate targets, and at 3M, we're also proud to have made significant progress on our own. We've reduced by 80% overall greenhouse gas emissions since 2002, and 21% reduction in our water usage since 2019. The EU has already entered a new transition with regulation to drive clean energy technology forward, including the Holistic Clean Industrial Deal. I look forward to the next steps, especially with the EU grid package to be adopted later this year. Robust electric grids are critical in all geographies to meet the grid bottlenecks created by a rapid expansion in renewable energy and integration of new technologies. A robust grid is the essential backbone that makes the energy transition happen. Grid resilience and grid digitalization should be a key priority for continued public and private partnerships and for addition to the upcoming European budget so that we can together implement sustainable energy projects. At 3M, we are ready with our technology to support this transition from wind and solar to hydrogen to smart sensors and from generation to consumption. We need swift action from policymakers to reduce energy prices, deliver an efficient grid package, and ensure the energy union is fully complete. Now, as I hand over to Zia and Commissioner Jurgensen, using my privilege as the first speaker today, I would like to tee up one more question to the Commissioner. What can companies like 3M do to support you? Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
In a very, very busy week. Let's maybe start with the glass half full, in the sense that you were part of the commissioners that recently announced that the EU is almost on track to reach its 2030 climate and energy targets, just shy of the 55% emissions reduction goal. But countries are really lagging behind on the energy sub-targets, on renewable energy and energy efficiency. Can you give us an idea of what you're working on, or what you're doing so that Europe gets there?
So I almost thought how refreshing a journalist starting with the positive, but you quickly moved on from that. I will say it is worth just spending 1 minute on the positive. we will get to the challenges, and there are many of them, and I'm not trying to neglect them, actually on the contrary. But what I will say, I was a Minister of Energy in Denmark when the Commission, the last mandate, put forward the proposal for the Green Deal. And even though I don't think I'm actually allowed to quote what goes on in an informal lunch among ministers, I will do so since there's almost nobody watching. It was not a positive response from member states, to say the least. Almost everybody around the table said that this is way too ambitious. 55%, that's impossible. Has the Commission lost all sense of realism? A few years later, it was adopted. Now it's not only adopted, we are actually implementing it. And every year we break the record for more new deployed renewables. So last year it was 78 gigawatts. This year it'll be 89 gigawatts. 1 gigawatt is enough to deliver electricity to more than 500,000 homes. So this is huge. But it is also true, as you said, even though it's going fast, it's not going fast enough. And we basically face 3 big challenges. One is our competitiveness. We pay too much for our energy in Europe, 2 to 3 times more than they do in the US and China. This needs to change. We need to bring down the prices dramatically. 2, security. We need to become 100% independent of Russian energy. I put forward recently, the Commission put forward recently, a roadmap to make that happen. This is important not only because the gas is expensive, but more importantly, because we don't want to be indirectly helping fill up the war chest in Kremlin. And thirdly, of course, climate change. Climate change is here, it's not going to disappear. Actually, Europe is the continent that's warming the fastest. But of course, the consequences are hitting even harder in the more vulnerable countries on the planet. So it's a moral imperative for us to do something about that. The good news is that all of these 3 challenges demand the same solutions. Fast deployment of new renewables, better energy efficiency.
And just seizing on that very last word, actually, I mean, that's the area where the Commission's assessment actually showed a real gap. I think it was 8% instead of the 11.7% in reduction of final energy consumption that the EU is aiming for 2030. You're also co-hosting an energy efficiency summit with the International Energy Agency just this week, so very, very topical. What's going wrong there on energy efficiency?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a paradox, really, because if we look at it, just objectively speaking, just from an economic perspective, investments in energy efficiency, they work faster than anything else. They pay back faster than anything else. They're easier to implement than most other things we can do. So you would think, even if you just let it to be up to the market, that would be what would happen first. But we have to acknowledge that it's not going fast enough. We have, in the last mandate, adopted in the European Union a lot of extremely important legislation that, when we implement it, will help us also more than what is happening today. But we also need to acknowledge that really it's not going fast enough, so we need to think about this also in future legislative processes. One thing that I will highlight is that the key to a lot of energy efficiency improvements is in electrification, and I will be putting forward also a plan for electrification. Also there, we have an area where we are clearly lagging behind. More or less electrification in our production and industry has stagnated within the last decade, so we need to do more.
Yeah, and what are you going to do about it?
Well, one point that I just mentioned, which is extremely important, is that it's not as if nothing has been decided. So the Energy Efficiency Directive, the different parts of legislation we have on buildings and housing, when that is implemented, that will lead to huge improvements. But we also need to do more, and I'm afraid I will have to keep you waiting just a few more days, because we will put forward some new proposals 2 days from now, because we have the conference with the IEA on energy efficiency, but also because it's my 50th birthday.
That's quite a birthday celebration.
Exactly.
Okay, so on Thursday we can expect some announcements on energy efficiency also for the EU.
But I do want to underline, though, that really we do need to acknowledge that implementation of what has already been decided on energy efficiency is most important. I'm sure you'll, in your panel, you have many competent voices to speak on that also later. Because really, if you look at it, if you look at the Energy Efficiency Directive that was adopted last mandate, this is extremely ambitious. And I also want to send this signal to member states, because it's important to, one, let them know, please, you need to do more. But second, also to let them know that I acknowledge, and we in the Commission acknowledge, that it's not small things we are asking them to do. So we will not overwhelm them with new demands and new targets before we are actually on track with this implementation.
Okay. So you're not aiming for a reopening of the Energy Efficiency Directive anytime soon?
No.
No, okay. You mentioned electrification, and we've seen a lot of political pushback against measures meant to encourage electrification. For example, the EU's combustion engine phase-out, which is meant to encourage electric vehicle uptake, or at the member state level, particularly in Germany, a push against the uptake of heat pumps. Does that worry you? Is that something that you think the Commission can counteract?
Well, certainly not. It's certainly not going fast enough. I will say, though, that if you look at the deployment of heat pumps overall in Europe, it's going very, very fast in the right direction. If you look at how much renewable energy that's being deployed, thereby making it possible for more electrification, that's also going fast in the right direction. I do think that there are areas where we need to do more. One of them is permitting of new renewable energy production, and also of grid infrastructure is going far too slow.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking a few percent too slow. It takes a decade sometimes to get a new permit. So we need to slash that fundamentally, and again, not 10 or 20 or 30%, fundamentally. In the Affordable Energy Action Plan, we propose that as a general rule, it shouldn't take more than 6 months to get a permit for a new production facility, and for complicated projects then maybe up to a couple of years. But now it's more than a decade often, and that will not stand. So that's one thing. Second, of course, attracting the investments in grids that we need, grids and interconnectors, other types of physical infrastructure. And connected to this is the fact that we are still not connected enough in Europe. So yes, we do have an energy union. This all started 75 years ago when Schuman made a declaration about a coal and steel union. So basically an energy union. So it's a little bit of a paradox that today we have, well, basically a union that's better for an internal markets that's better for selling toothpaste or tomatoes than energy, really. So again, I'm not neglecting the huge potential or the huge progress that we have done, and had we not been as connected as we are in our electricity market, we would pay more than 30 billion more for our electricity every year. So compared to the rest of the world, it's working pretty well. But we're still not where we need to be, and the potential is huge if we indeed make our energy union a genuine energy union where we are truly connected.
Yeah, I think Spain and Portugal have asked you and the Commission to help them talk to France about better interconnection of the Iberian Peninsula after the recent blackout. How can you help them with that, or is that something that should just stay between them?
Yeah, well, I think this was on the agenda even before the blackout, but let's see what the evaluation and the analysis shows when that is ready. That's too early to say, but in any case, we know that it is a good idea to be more connected. That part of Europe is certainly one of the most important ones, but I will say it would be difficult for me to point to a a part of Europe that would not benefit from more interconnectedness.
Okay.
So this is really about a major major scale investments, a collected plan for how we can connect Europe much better. And there's some very obvious areas. You mentioned Spain, Portugal, France as one of them. Also, I think probably some of my friends in the southeastern part of Europe will say, well, we need it just as much. So there are really many places where this would make sense.
Okay. And you mentioned permitting. I mean, I seem to remember that the Commission comes out with something to ease permitting quite frequently. And so what's there left? What levers are there left for you to propose? Yeah, well, again, this is also about being mindful not to neglect progress that's already being made. And it's true that some of the new rules and derogations that has been possible to utilize within the last years has made some progress possible, especially a country like Germany has managed to do these things much more efficiently than they've done before. But still, we are lagging behind, and I think it's probably the issue that most companies, but also mayors and local communities, national lawmakers, NGOs mention when they talk to me about what's really lacking in order for us to really speed up. So we will need to put something forward that is fundamentally different from what we have today. I cannot give you the details of how we'll do it today, but I can assure you that we're working on something that is fundamentally transforming the way that it works today. Would there be in the form of simplification omnibus on energy?
Well, you could say that this would be a simplification, but I think that this goes a little bit further than that. I will also be presenting an omnibus on energy. We are in the process of analyzing my entire portfolio, so there's a lot to look at, and we will see where we can make the biggest benefit with regards to supporting our green transition, bringing down prices, increasing our energy security, and that process is ongoing. The other process on permitting, even though it also has an element of simplification, is something that we're working on separately.
Okay. Do you know when there would be an omnibus or the other? No. Okay. Can you tell us what pieces of legislation are likely to be touched by simplification? No? Okay. Well, don't let me put it another way. This morning...
I could give you a politician's long answer, but I prefer to just say no.
All right. But this morning, some NGOs and I think also some renewable energy lobby groups sent you a letter asking you not to touch nature laws such as the Habitats Directive to ease permitting as part of any future omnibus. And what do you say to them? Can you promise them that?
Well, so first of all, that is not legislation that is in my portfolio, so probably it wouldn't be suitable if I answered that directly. What I can say, though, is that in our Affordable Energy Action Plan, we also mentioned that there's probably no way for us to do this better and more pragmatically and faster if we don't look at the balance of how we are today protecting our nature and how we are giving permits. But it's very clear that, of course, we're not ready to do anything that would fundamentally change the willingness of us to protect nature. Goes without saying. But I will also make the point that if you look at it from a nature protection perspective, really, it doesn't matter if you actually give a permit for a project. It doesn't matter for the nature whether or not that took 6 months or took 10 years. It doesn't matter how many years people have been negotiating and making an analysis, if indeed the permit is to be given. So there is ways of doing it, and we have also shown progress within the last couple of years, and that's the work that we need to build on.
Okay. Another piece of legislation that's come under pressure recently is the methane legislation that is meant to curb the emissions of methane in the oil and gas sector in particular. There's been groups that have said, maybe that's something we should simplify, get rid of to appease the United States and to make it easier to import LNG from them. Is that something that's that you're considering?
No.
No.
No, just kidding.
I mean, if it's we're not touching it.
No. I mean, so it's not only something that's been raised by American companies. It's also been raised by both some member states in Europe and companies. So it would be a bit arrogant of me to just say no, and that's it. But really, this is new legislation. It has huge potential for bringing down emissions. We need to stay on track with fighting climate change, obviously. And I am, of course, listening to member states, companies that say, okay, the way this has been made is very difficult for us to implement. Then, okay, we can see in the implementation, are there things that can be done better in a different way, as long as it does not hurt the reduction targets. But we're not going to reopen it or take it back or backtrack it or anything like that. And I will also say that meeting with many American companies in Houston for the Sarah Week, it's very clear that there are many of them that are ready to export more LNG to us, which is actually good news, because when we get rid of the Russian gas, we will need something to replace it. Best is, of course, if we can move away from gas altogether, but for some years we will need some, and their diversification of our suppliers is much needed, and American companies can very well be a part of that. But they did mention, some of them, that they could have some problems with the implementation of the methane regulation, but they were not against it. It's very important, actually, to mention. So I've read in newspapers and other media reports that apparently there's a big there should be a big opposition across the Atlantic towards this. This is not my impression at all. Actually, on the contrary, many of these companies see it as a point of advantage for them in competing, because they're actually able to live up to this. So again, if there are technical issues that will make it easier to implement, this goes for American companies and European companies. We're always pragmatic, but we are not at all willing to move away from the fundamentals.
Okay. I've asked you a lot about existing legislation. I'd like to ask you a question about upcoming legislation. So your colleague, Commissioner Hoekstra, is busy working up a climate target for 2040. Once that's done, it'll be your job to come up with a renewable energy target for 2040, correct?
Yes.
And do you have any timeline for that?
No.
No. Okay. No, that's fair enough. It's
no,
in the future.
but to be honest, I don't. I would like to say a few words about it, though, because it is one of the few new things that this commission actually promised when we had the hearings in the Parliament. You are all probably very familiar with the one iron law. You cannot promise anything new in these hearings, but nonetheless, we did, and the President did decide that it was a good idea for us to send that very clear signal that yes, because renewables are so important for us, because we want to be very sure that the world knows that there's no backtracking. On the contrary, we want to fast track. It's also good to already now say that yes, when we have a 2040 target for reductions, it's only also rational that is accompanied by a target for renewables. It's too early to say yet when that will be, and of course what it will be. But we will, of course, also there work very closely with both member states and the Parliament.
You can't tell us how high or low you would want to aim? No. All right. But lots of member states are quite insistent on the principle now of technological neutrality, and some say that technological neutrality means that there shouldn't be a renewable energy goal, because nuclear energy, for example, should just be treated exactly the same. How are you going to deal with that?
Well, we will put forward a target for renewable energy, which will be renewable energy. And then the question on how much nuclear energy we will have is one that is separate from that. And it's very clear that obviously for us to get to carbon neutrality in 2050, and even for us to reach our targets, or even more so for us to reach our targets in 2030 and 2040, nuclear will be an important part of that solution. And next week, at the latest, I will also be presenting an illustrative report analyzing what are the status of nuclear in Europe as we speak, and what are the analysis of my services on the years to come.
Okay. Can you tell us anything else, what you're thinking about on the post-2030 climate and energy framework that might be coming from you, other than a 2040 renewable energy target?
I can't really, because it all follows of the negotiations that my colleague Hoekstra is in the middle of, well, not in the middle of, is soon to be concluding.
Yeah. I know it's not your field, but you spend a lot of time working on climate policy. What do you think of the idea that the 90% target can only be met by introducing what I think the Commissioner Hoekstra calls flexibilities?
I would be really annoyed if Commissioner Hoekstra was here answering questions that detailed about my portfolio before I put forward a proposal, so I will not say anything about that.
Do you think the same thing might happen to you, to your renewable energy target, that you can only make that happen if
I think we should make a test when I come with mine, and invite Hoekstra a few weeks before and ask him detailed questions about whether or not he will spill the beans. I hope he will not.
Okay. Maybe I'll close with a bit of more philosophical question. And when you answered my first question, you said that not only is there, various angles like competitiveness and security that should push us to go ahead with the clean energy transition, but that there is a moral imperative.
Sure.
That's something I think you hear pretty rarely these days in Brussels or in European capitals. The focus has very much become competitiveness and security. Is the EU losing sight of that moral imperative?
I think all of the three challenges that we are facing are moral questions. Do we want our citizens to be able to pay their energy bills? 46 million people could not pay their energy bills last year and heat their homes adequately. That's a moral question. That's something that we cannot live with. We need to change that. Security. We've paid more money for energy from Russia since the full-scale invasion 3 years ago than we've given Ukraine in aid. That will not stand, and we need to stop that as soon as possible. Climate change. Well, I don't mean to sound too dramatic, but people are dying already now. So obviously we need to continue to fight climate change, and we need to do it even better and faster than we're doing it now. So yes, it's very easy to focus on the technical aspects, and I know the Draghi report backwards and forwards, and I love to quote it, but really, bottom line, these are also moral questions, and these are also about European values.
On that note, Commissioner, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure, and in just a few seconds, we'll broaden the conversation with our panel. They'll just need to do some stage magic first. Thank you.
Thank you.
Europe is in a global race to lead in clean tech innovation. The EU's plan to spur in-house clean tech, such as hydrogen or carbon removals, promises to drastically cut industrial emissions while boosting energy security. But it needs to shift from strategy to action, and a few key questions remain. Should the EU go green or go clean? Does Europe have the right plan to compete with China and the United States? And after the clean industrial deal, What's still missing? We'll dive into this and more with our panelists. Please welcome Miguel Gil Tetra, Head of Cabinet for Teresa Ribera, the Executive Vice President for a clean, just, and competitive transition at the European Commission. Siri Crouch, Director at Energex CCS, Board Member at Klimaworks and Recarber. Thomas Pellerin-Carlan, French MEP from the Socialists and Democrats Party and member of the Industry, Research and Energy Committee. Frédéric Doyer, Senior Vice President and Head of Hub Europe at Siemens Energy. Please give a round of applause for our speakers.
All right, thank you so much for joining us. We've got a brilliant panel here, and we just heard quite a lot from Commissioner Jorgensen. And before I ask you lots of questions, I actually want to know from each of you if, you know, like in journalism, we give you like sort of like a right to comment or something on what the Commissioner just said. Is there something that surprised you, something that you would have liked to hear, or you wouldn't, you actually preferred he wouldn't have committed to or not committed to? But yeah, why don't we start with Frédéric and just go from right to left.
First of all, thank you for having me in this wonderful panel. And it was, in a lot of times, music for my ears, what the Commissioner said, because I think we are tackling all the right topics. We are all speaking about the same things. You can also clearly see that politics is listening to the industry, which really helps in that sense. I think now it's a lot of things which are rightly set on paper. The thing is on execution. I think especially on fastening permission. I think if we can really leapfrog that now and not only do a little percentage, that would tremendously help our industry. So absolutely right things that were said. I hope they get executed now very fast.
Okay, Thomas, what about you?
To be honest, I'm really happy with Commissioner Jorgensen, obviously what he said today, but more generally the work that he has been doing over the past month. I think more than ever we need a strong energy commissioner to be able to overcome the challenges that we are discussing now. And yeah, frankly, I think is the right man at the right position at the right time.
Okay, Siri, what do you think?
So obviously I'm going to agree with most of that. I think indeed it's really important that we heard the infrastructure build out, I think is absolutely critical. With that, I think indeed the piece about indeed the permitting and actually anything we can do to speed up permitting for me was a great point that was raised. Maybe not surprisingly considering my background, the one thing that I was disappointed that I didn't hear was actually CO2 and CCS. I heard a lot about, shall we say, the rest of the infrastructure and green energy, etc. But I didn't hear the piece about actually what are we going to do about what we already have and how do we actually manage the transition component.
Yeah, we're going to come back on CCS. Miguel, I mean, I'm assuming you're not about to trash Commissioner.
No, I mean, full support and, full agreement with everything that he said. I mean, he's, as was said, the right man on the right post and, all the comments on decarbonization, competitiveness, climate, but also social issues, I think he put it in a very right way.
Okay, yeah. Very, very positive. So obviously we have to move to the negatives now. I'd also like to get a sense of, I mean, you mentioned that you were missing the CCS aspect, for example, but I'd like to get a sense where you think, just really a quick sense, a couple of sentences, where the main challenges lie that you think the EU really needs to tackle now, like in the next few years. And maybe let's do reverse order. Miguel, do you want to start? Or shall I let Frédéric do it? All right, Frédéric then.
I mean, as the Commissioner also quoted the Draghi report, you can clearly read out of that a lot of investments are needed in order to be successful in that transition. And I think there we need to have the right frameworks in Europe. And I'm not only talking about public investments now, but I'm also talking to create the right framework for private investments to come in that. Yeah? But it's a bit of both to have that level playing field, that people are willing to invest in that. That also requires stability. And I think in certain mechanisms that we currently have in Europe, you can also tweak them in a way He was also talking a lot about grid, for example, which is key in order to bring the renewables to real life then as well. And I think also those can be included in the public investments initiatives, and also in the funding from the European and the nationals, that, for example, manufacturing for those grid components in Europe gets rewarded as well. And I think those are the things we need to work more on, because it's not only energy prices that are better in the US compared to Europe, it's also investment criteria that makes it a lot more attractive at the moment to invest in the US compared to Europe. And I think there we need to work together to change that.
Okay, so investment. Miguel, do you want to come back on that?
Yes, no, I think, it was very rightly pointed out, that we need investments, very, very clearly. For that, I would like to single three things. We need to complete the savings and investment union, because we need capital markets, and a lot of these investments will come from the private sector. We need also to complete, and deepen the single market, not only for the traditional sectors, but also for sectors like the ones that we would like to support and see thriving in Europe, like the clean tech. And finally, I think it is very important that we stick to our regulatory certainty or our predictability, because we are in a world that is becoming very unstable. One can say that, and I think that the fact that in Europe we have rule of law, regulatory certainty, we have clear targets of where we're going, because we're doing a transition that will take several years to happen. We cannot change our targets every 2 years, and we cannot change our objectives every 2 years. I think that this is something that is rewarded by investors.
Okay, yeah. Thomas, is your main concern also investment, or is there something else?
I think it's the combination of three things, and the three of them are equally important. And if we don't have one, we kind of lose on the other. I would actually start with the stability of the regulatory framework. Okay. That is something that is critical, and that is something on which I am criticizing what the Commission has been doing, like throwing legislation under the omnibus. That is not the right way forward. This is important per se, to provide long-term predictability for the people that need to invest over the next 5, 10, 15 years. But that is even more important now that we see the erratic behavior of the US president. And so more than ever, the fact that we are predictable in Europe is a comparative advantage, especially compared to the US frenzy. The second thing, obviously, is investment, but more precisely, predictable public support to investment is what is currently lacking. And from that perspective, what we are trying to do with the clean energy transition and the decarbonization of the industry is what in academia, because I used to be a researcher until a year ago, in academia we call a socio-technical transition. This is something that takes 2 or 3 decades at least. And to transform our society over the next 20, 30 years, we've got a public budget visibility for 6 to 12 months, mostly, looking at the national budgets. Obviously, the EU is a bit different. So we need to have a pan-European investment plan that articulates EU-level support through equity, through subsidy, through loans, with national-level public support, with obviously the objective to crowd in the maximum private investment that we can. And the third, and clearly not the last, is to stop being naive when it comes to the world we're living in. Mario Draghi is often quoted. I will try to quote the second report written by another Italian Prime Minister, Enrico Letta. Before doing that work, Enrico Letta published a book, which I'm translating from French here, but it was saying, we need to make Europe in a world of bullies. That is the world where we're living in. And we need to stop being naive when it comes to defense, when it comes to Chinese investment in our electricity grid, or when it comes, obviously, to trade vis-à-vis the USA. And I think we suffer, or at least a lot of us in Europe, even at position of power, suffer from an optimism bias. I was recently having dinner with an important minister from one key member state, and he described Donald Trump as being, quote unquote, a hitch. I'm sorry, that's not a hitch. It is a new order of things. And to quote Sven Biskop, who is an academic working on geopolitics, we should behave as if Trump and Vance were here to stay for the next 12 years.
Okay.
And we're not doing that when it comes to trade, when it comes to clean tech, when it comes to defense.
Right. Siri, I mean, is the regulatory situation also a concern for you? I mean, in terms of like your industry, carbon removals, there's almost maybe not enough there yet? Or?
So for me, I'm going to say I actually also work with a lot of venture capitalists and a lot of investors, because that's actually who's driving a lot of this at the moment. And actually, it's also at the moment, it's a voluntary carbon market. So it's who's purchasing in that space. And so for me, I think, a lot of what's being discussed is absolutely critical. Stability, no one in this world is investing for 5 years or something like that. So being able to see that long term, absolutely critical. And that is something which at the moment Europe does potentially offer. I think the other one, though, that we actually haven't touched on is pragmatism. And this is where maybe Europe falls down. Yeah? And that is actually sitting there saying what is good versus what is perfect. And so much of our regulation, we try and move to what is perfect. And I don't think you can regulate perfect. What you have to do is sit there and say what is good, what gets us moving and going in this space. And then once we're going, we can sit there and say, well, actually, maybe we can improve this. But too often we're looking at, and I can use hydrogen.
Can you give me an example?
Yeah, hydrogen is an example.
Okay.
Not my space, but I still think it's a good example. Everything was green and blue was bad, but you can't build up enough green to get industry to move. So you have to be more pragmatic and say we're going to need a percentage of blue, a percentage of green, and over time we hope to move forward. So to me, that's pragmatism. Yeah. And it's one of my phrases was always, we let the perfect get in the way of the good. And good is better than not moving at all. So I think that is absolutely key. The other one I still think, I'll repeat it again, is it's permitting, and it's recognizing how do we simplify the permitting procedure in order to let some of these bigger projects and infrastructure plays to move. And sometimes it can be a short-term permitting issue, let's say a NOx issue that stops construction. But that NOx issue is only for the 2 years of construction. I'm actually building a project which is looking at CO2 removals for 20, 30 plus years. And so it's, again, it's that pragmatism in terms of the permitting as to, well, what is the bigger good in this space?
Okay.
So for me, those are the things that I would really bring to the table.
Yeah.
And I think, sorry, the other one actually, because I mentioned I work with a lot of capital, if you like, and for them, indeed, it is having the business case and making that business case that, and it doesn't have to be one thing, it can be a combination of carrots and sticks. So, it can be tax on one hand, subsidies on another, but actually, equally, it's the buying power of the EU. And I think this comes to your point, one of your points about actually manufacturing inside the EU and making that, that if we do it low carbon, that actually the purchasing power of the governments actually is used to bring value to people who've decarbonised. So be it low carbon cement, be it low carbon steel, there's huge government contracts. Yeah, bring that piece to bear.
I was about to ask about public procurement, but Frederick, did you quickly want to come in on?
Oh, I was very happy to hear Siri mentioning also the hydrogen example, because it's a very practical example that we are facing. Had we sitting here 3 years ago, everybody would have spoken very, very highly and positive about the hydrogen economy. Yeah? And I think being too academic about especially the color of the hydrogen makes it very complicated. And that what we see at the moment, we are far away from the targets we had, and we are far away from our 2030 target in hydrogen. And in this case, it's not a technology issue. It's really an issue of building the required infrastructure that is needed in order to make a business case for, in this case, our customers. Yeah? So I think that is the one thing. On your second example, and I can only echo what you were saying, and also the Commissioner was saying it. Yeah, if we want to connect now, for example, France and the Iberian Peninsula closer. Just to give you that example, normally, if for such an interconnecting project, 20,000-page document that you need to review as a company, But that the problem is it's not the same 20,000 pages for the next one connecting the Baltic states to the European grid. It's another 20,000, which requires a lot of time and also delays those projects in many ways. So I think there we have now a good chance as Europe to come much closer together and find a common way of doing certain things.
Yeah. Open a lot of cans here, and I'm about to throw a lot of questions at Miguel because I know he has to leave a little bit early. First of which is, do you think you're striking the right balance between that need for regulatory stability and that what I'm hearing Syrian say is that kind of doing away with that perfectionism?
Well, I think, the current commission, and that was clear, from the competitiveness compass and the clean industrial deal. We are now moving into a new stage, of the decarbonization of the economy, and we are really, getting into the real, implementation and seeing results on the ground. So I think that the current commission, is quite pragmatic because we are staying course. And we are being, flexible, in some of the areas, precisely because, this is, one of the biggest transformations of the economy. I would say, this type of transformation takes place, once every century or even every 2 centuries. So, of course, the pathway is not going to be completely linear and, exactly, as one would have, let's say, expecting, in a modeling exercise. I was doing modeling exercises, myself, so I know that quite well. So I think we are now, working and being, pragmatic in order precisely to deliver, where we want to go.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And hydrogen has been mentioned now by both Frederick and Siri. Is that where the Commission is leaning, to stop just focusing on green hydrogen and go for all the colors of the rainbow? No,
I wouldn't put it, like this. I would put it, more like, the Commission, wants, to deliver, on the hydrogen, actually making the targets a reality. Okay. All right.
And speaking of targets, there's a big one coming up, the 2040 climate target. We were talking about regulatory certainty. This is also really important for industry in that sense. And another industry concern is the trajectory of the emissions trading system, which is why there's also a lot of interest in, for example, carbon removals, as well as now international carbon credits, and making that part of the system, which has become part of the debate on the 2040 climate target. And Miguel, I'm wondering if you can tell me where the Commission is leaning on both of these issues.
Well, I would stick, to the very prudent, answer of Commissioner Jorgensen. I think that's the right way to put it.
Right. Okay. Even though your commissioner is overseeing the whole.
Yes, but I think, there, we will. The proposal is upcoming. We will see. I have nothing to add on this.
Okay. What about everyone else, Thomas? What do you think in terms of those are two very different things. Maybe let's start with carbon removals rather than the international carbon credits. Is that something that should be integrated into the emissions trading system? What are you expecting Commission to do on that?
So first, I think we need to have a serious discussion about what is the current technology and what is its capacity. It is in that spirit that I co-hosted with the EPP MEP Peter Liese a working lunch on carbon removals. Climeworks was one of the participants, obviously. And maybe 2 things. First, when it comes, sorry, maybe I need to explain what it is to everyone, especially in the online audience. But essentially, we call it DACS, so direct air carbon capture and storage. So it's the idea that you take some air. In that air, you have 0.04% of CO2. That's 400 parts per million, a number that keeps on increasing. And you extract from that air that 0.04%. Or at least part of it, of that CO2 that you can later store in any way, shape, or form. Can this be helpful? Yeah. At scale, unlikely. And the life cycle analysis really depends on the electricity that you use and the opportunity cost. So for Iceland, for instance, where Climeworks is located, that's clearly one of the best case scenario. I'm saying that because a lot of my colleagues in the European Parliament are not tech nerds like me, and therefore they can dream of some technologies that are not already there. To give you an unrelated example, we are currently negotiating the Parliament's position on energy security. And in the draft that I commented and changed, it was written, so there was a whole paragraph on nuclear, and it was written that SMR, so nuclear small modular reactors, contribute to energy security, using the word contribute at the present tense. And I was like, well, no, currently there is like none of them that are actually running. But apparently in the mind of some of my colleagues, they are. But in the physical reality, they're not there yet in Europe. And that's a bit the same for DAX in that perspective. In Parliament, I think the level of the debate has been undertaking a great leap backward in terms of rationality of the energy discussion that we are having. And when it comes to hydrogen, I get your point. I think we should not also move too far away on the other direction. The debate we're having on hydrogen reminds me of a debate I think the EU had, I don't know, 10 or 20 years ago on the guarantees of origin for renewable electricity. And the thing was so mindlessly flexible, to use that term, that it was pure greenwashing. You could have a coal power plant selling electrons in Germany, claiming that it was renewables, because they would be buying some guarantees of origin of some Portuguese hydropower plant that produced something in January. So something where you kind of legally lie to your customers because the system was so lax. And at the end of the day, I mean, what was the role of guarantees of origin for the uptake of renewable electricity? I mean, close to zero. If you can name me a single renewables facility that was created in Europe where the final investment decision was made because of guarantees of origin for renewables, I mean, I'm happy to see the example. So we need to strike the fine balance there, because if we don't do that through regulation, either we will not do it or we will need to kind of spend our way out of it, which obviously is not the most useful use of public spending. If we can do things with private finance only, all the better, and we need public investment where it is suitable. Often it is where, for political reasons, we refuse to do what is the correct regulation.
So the balance between encouraging, obviously, like the investment and like research in carbon removals, but not treating it as a silver bullet that sort of can solve everyone's problems.
Yeah, I mean, and here again, like even Climeworks, for instance, will say that it's not a silver bullet. Like you can't capture, I don't know, 30 gigatons of CO2 in the world. That makes no sense.
But equally, you can't afford not to do it either.
No, of course.
Yeah.
So if we do, let me think like an engineer for a second. We are in 2050. What is the type of direct air capture carbon storage that we need? It's something that contributes to offset the emissions which we know will still be there. Will our armies still need oil in 2050? Most likely. I mean, we have more drones, we can do e-kerosene, but it's very likely that some of the jet fighters that we'll still have to use to protect ourselves in 2050 will still be using oil. Will we still need to have some planes that will use oil to go to Antarctica for scientific research? 100%. So for those areas, I'm looking at how we can link those type of technology with those kind of areas. One thing that also struck me from the working lunch we had on direct air carbon capture was that most of the capturing is happening in Europe, but most of the people willing to buy were actually in the USA. And that's also a big difference that we have. I mean, I've got a lot of problems with a lot of US billionaires, but still, a lot of them are actually putting their money where their mouth is. I wish if more Europeans could do the same, both from the individuals and the companies.
I'll just, Miguel, how are you doing for time? Do you need to?
Yes, 5 minutes.
Okay, then
yes.
let me just, was there anything that you wanted to respond to here? I mean, there's a lot of questions about the balance here the Commission might be striking, or how you could encourage the uptake of carbon removals among EU companies. What I'm hearing here is that it's a much greater interest from US companies.
No, nothing to add on that point.
All right, okay, well then, Siri, you wanted to comment.
Well, one thing I'd like to, because you were talking DAC and you were talking DAC specifically, but DAC is only one of the whole suite of CDR technologies, and I don't think anyone is talking about it being the only one. What they're saying is actually you need the full suite. I think you've also got to sit there and say, the reality is we can do everything else, but actually the only thing that is addressing the legacy CO2 that is in the atmosphere, and if we don't take that out, we've still got a problem with climate change. 100%. So even if we've put everything on, electrical, hydrogen, you name it, we've moved as fast as we possibly can for all renewables, we've still got a problem with the legacy CO2. And that's where you have to start looking now at how do you actually address that, because most of these technologies are in their infancy. It's going to take them time. They are on a TRL, technology readiness level journey to move from demo scale, which is, you can say, if you look at what's in Iceland, it's a big demo, yeah? And to move from that onwards takes time, and there'll be stumbling blocks along the way, etc. But for me, it's actually also looking at a portfolio, because you've also got to look at which CDRs are permanent, and which CDRs are you're delaying the carbon cycle, as in you're putting it into a slow cycle, but it will come back. And so if you look at things like nature-based solutions, yes, it removes it, but eventually trees fall down, they rot, and CO2 comes back round. If you look at some of the other ones, and you look at things like enhanced rock weathering, biochar, yes, it's a slower cycle, but it still comes back around. The only ones where you start talking, no, I'm taking fossil CO2 and I'm putting it back in the fossil record, are where CCS is involved.
Yes.
Yeah? And so that is BECCS, and that is DAC CCS. And so if you want it permanently removed, that's where you have to start moving to. Unfortunately, those are the more expensive, more complicated versions to look at. So I don't think anyone's saying it's only this one, but they're saying this is part of the portfolio mix. And I think you have to look at what the Science Based Target Initiative said, who have recognised now we will not get there without this. And so you have to start talking about CDRs being part of companies being able to meet their portfolio initiatives. And equally, I think as the ETS comes down and slices down, you're going to sit there and say, well, actually, the offsets that people are trading at the moment will reduce. And the only thing that can step into that space and has to expand is the CDR component. So for me, I think it's critical. It's an industry in its nascency at the moment, and there are other ones. There's enhanced rock weathering, there is people are looking at ocean capture, but it's got a long ramp up to get to full industrial scale. And so we've got to build that into our thinking and put the policies in place that encourage it. And is it that bad that actually we're doing it in Europe and we're selling it to the Americans? I don't think that's bad personally at all.
I mean, does it make any sense for there to be any restrictions, for example, how CCS should be used? I mean, you mentioned the ETS, that is Europe's heavy industry. We often hear maybe CCS should be for hard-to-abate sectors only, but where we're seeing a lot of investment is, of course, from oil and gas companies that are very interested in offsetting their emissions. Miguel, is that like a thought that the Commission is having?
I mean, I would say that, we are starting, all our reflections, from science, and I think that this was well put. I mean, I think that there are no shortcuts, but I could not be, much more precise, and concrete on this, because, all of these issues are being, discussed.
Okay, yeah. Frederick, you wanted to come in, yeah.
Well, one thing, we're listening to that discussion, and I think that's the beauty of our industry, that it's not so clear how this goes. And there's a lot of technology. You mentioned the silver bullet, and Thomas, you also said it's not like in the car industry. At some point in time, where this will most likely end. Yeah, in energy, it's more than one solution. Yeah, the carbon capture is certainly one, and then renewables is another one, grid is another one, and I think that makes it very nice for for all of you said technology nerds like us, that there's not only the one thing, and it's not so clear, is SMR now a big part of the future solution? Hydrogen most likely will be a bit of everything, and I think that makes it very attractive for everyone to work in that industry as well, to give the whole thing a positive note. If you, open any newspaper at any point of time at the moment, and you will read something about energy, which is great, and also for us as a company attracts a lot of talent at the moment, which I think is good.
Yeah. Just to prove I'm a tech nerd as well. Please. So yeah, if you look at this at the moment, and you're challenging, is it oil and gas companies just wanting to do CCS to continue? Yeah, but I think you've actually also got to look at, if we ran as hard as we can on everything to do with the energy transition, yeah, you are still going to have a base load of about 5 gigatons per annum. Now you can argue, is it 3 gigatons, is it 18 gigatons? The slower we are in the energy transition, the more you're heading towards that 18 gigatons. If you look at the IEA, you look at the IPCC, any of these, yeah? To be clear, what is a gigaton? I don't know many people can actually visualize what a gigaton is, yeah? If you put the world's population on the biggest scale, we weigh about half a gigaton. Scarily, the world's plastic production is about a gigaton per year. The current oil and gas industry is 5 gigatons per year. So even if we have gone as fast as possible on the energy transition, we still need an industry roughly the size of the current oil and gas industry taking CO2 and storing it underground. And that is because of what's going on with the cement industry. You mentioned other hard-to-abate industries. We, as a world, are building a city the size of New York every year. That's an awful lot of cement. That is an awful lot of CO2. So I think, I get very cross, for want of a better description, when people say this is only the oil and gas industry trying to preserve their current position. No, it's fundamental. And the more we postpone talking about getting the infrastructure in place for CCS, CDRs, etc., the more we're pushing a bow wave in front of us. It takes, the oil and gas industry, 5 gigatons per annum, that's taken them 120 years to build out that infrastructure. We haven't got 120 years to build out the next CCS infrastructure. So, again, we have to get real and look in the mirror.
Yeah.
And on the oil and gas industry as well, it's very clear by them. They get pressure from their investors to invest in the technology that brings the best business case and the highest return on their investment. And if we, all of us here, will not make the environment like to invest in renewables, for example, or in CCUS, then they will, of course, not invest into that because they just don't have any other option to do that, because their investors will give so much pressure that they're continue to do what they have done. Huh?
That was part of the raison d'être of the CSRD, so the Corporate Social Responsibility Reporting Directive and the Due Diligence Directive that the Commission is proposing to partially dismantle, is to make sure that investors can look obviously at profits, return on investment, but can also have a clear view of other elements that need to be taken into account. If we zoom out, we're currently living in a world where, under our current economic structure, if an investor needs to choose between saving the world and make, 11% profit, and destroying the world and make 12% profit, we'll go for the second option. That's currently the structure of the society where we live in. And the role of public policy is obviously to make sure that we can tweak this. And part of that has to do with how we can increase the cost of pollution and how we can decrease the cost of choosing the clean options. Yeah, price on CO2, but we discussed that a lot, but also just basic taxation. I live in a country, France, where electricity is more taxed than fossil gas.
We have to say goodbye to Miguel. Thank you so much.
So maybe just to end on that point, I don't have the EU level figure on top of my mind, but we've been living through the biggest fossil fuel subsidy increase in recent European history over the last 3 or 4 years. If the energy system, the fossil fuel energy system, did not collapse 2 years ago, it's because the EU and its member state put 600 billion euros on the table. That is the cost of the fossil fuel system. And obviously this is driven by politics. Like if you look at it from a budgetary perspective, you will not introduce 30 cents a liter of subsidy like it was the case in Germany, in France, and many other countries did the exact same. I think Finland is the only exception of the 2022-2023 fossil fuel subsidy spending spree. And according to official French data, the French government will spend again this year 7 billion euros in fossil fuel subsidy. And so that's kind of one of the very low-hanging fruit that we collectively Europeans have refused to pick. I hope we can slowly but surely progress towards at least stop doing harm. By that I mean stop using public money to subsidize stuff that we need to get rid of.
Yeah. And also there, you can use existing infrastructure in order to get ready for new technologies. I mean, you can use existing gas turbines to fire hydrogen in there. You can use existing pipelines to make it hydrogen ready, things like that. So it's not that we need to rebuild everything and destroy what is already there, but it's sometimes easier to make use of what's there than totally rebuilding of them.
Sure. I mean, we can use existing roads to put electric cars rather than oil cars on them, 100%.
Yeah. We've spent a lot of time talking about carbon capture, which we could hold a whole event about. And before we move on, I think I have to ask you, Siri, Climeworks recently said it would lay off quite a lot of its staff in, I think, around a quarter. There's also been reports that as you say, the big example it's setting in Iceland, the Orca plant, I think it's called, can't yet actually even offset the operating emissions of Climeworks. As that's come up, that the company has faced quite a lot of criticism. I know you're on the board. What's the future here? You said there's so much demand for this technology, but that sounds really like it's in trouble, no?
So, I mean, I mentioned already, it's a TRL level. You're on a journey, yeah? There's a demo plant, and then indeed the one you're talking about is Mammoth in that sense. It started up last year. It's got teething problems. It's a new technology. It's got, shall we say, challenges around not just, it's not the capture technology, it's more the systems engineering piece around it. So the full plant in that sense. Some of that is just actually moving out of being an R&D startup company into actually bringing in more of that industrial scale know-how about moving into larger scales, what are the things you need to look at, etc. It's actually one of the reasons they brought me onto the board, because my background is in large industrial scale projects. It was actually to help bring some of that knowledge in. On the challenge about some of the staffing piece, well, actually, part of that is what we were talking about earlier, regulatory uncertainty going on in the States. The next project was supposed to be in America. It was funded by the DOE, etc. Obviously, we all know that the investment climate has changed recently. Let's leave it that way. So that's a challenge, because they were ramping up to build the next project, and of course that has now been delayed. Now, I'm not going to pretend some of that delay may be useful, because it will allow us to look at some of those technology challenges and say, well, actually, what can we learn from the period of construction and operations we have? To say they can't actually offset their own emissions, that is always taken into account. Their carbon accounting is very clean. So that one, I would say, just be careful of, yeah? People like to take things and look at them as badly as they can, let's put it that way. So if you are where they are selling credits into the market, they have already taken into account their own emissions in that space.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
What I would say is, look at all of the DAC companies which are out there that have pre-sold credits. The only one who's actually created any CDRs is Climeworks.
Okay.
Yeah? So they are the leader in this field. When you're the leader in this field, especially in a new tech, there's headwinds and you will hit road bumps. Yeah? And the thing is, have you got the ability to look at that, learn from it, and move forward? Yeah?
Yeah, yeah. Now, all of you said investment is a huge concern, and you also mentioned, what do we do with public money? Now, in the clean industrial deal, one segment was about public procurement, which generated, I think, a lot of excitement. There's legislation expected, I think, I don't know, later this year, next year, on what that actually means. Thomas, I mean, if you were in charge of this, how would you design this to make sure that this actually brings the money to where it should be?
I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Green public procurement is a thing that has existed for decades already. The thing is that we need to go from experimenting with green public procurement to making it the default option. And hopefully in 5 years, we don't need to say green public procurement because it will be, let's say, a pleonasm. I guess that's the word in English. You've been saying the same thing twice. But I want to move away from public procurement to talk about something that was not there in the Clean Industrial Deal, but I hope we can work on that nonetheless. If there is one clean tech sector that is particularly critical both from an economic perspective but also for a political narrative perspective, it's the battery manufacturing. And today, if you set up a battery manufacturing facility in the US, you know that you will get $32 per kilowatt hour of battery produced for the next 10 years. And you know that if your factory starts producing even in 2029, you will still get those subsidies for 10 years until 2039. That's what the Biden's Inflation Reduction Act delivers, and that part of the Biden's legacy has not been attacked by Trump. In Europe, what do you know? What is the thing that a company can introduce in its business plan to pitch it to venture capitalists or other investors? Nothing. There is no certainty whatsoever at the level at the E level, and at the national level. I mean, it's not only that sometimes you have elections and a government change, but even the same government can change its policy. We've seen between 2019 and 2023, 2020 and 2023, the subsidies for electric cars being drastically changed, both in Germany and in France, with the same government and the same coalition making a U-turn. So we need EU-level predictability there. Obviously, we need to debate the number, but one thing could be, one approach could be to say, we're going to guarantee that if you set up shop in Europe, you're going to get not $32 like in the US, because we can be more mindful of public spending, 20 euros of public subsidy per kilowatt hour of battery that is produced, and you split that 20 euros into 10 euros coming from EU funds, could be the Innovation Fund, could be public debts. I mean, we have many options to finance that, but 10 euros coming from the EU budget, and each member state commit to put 10 euros more for, obviously, the batteries that are produced inside that member state. To me, that is a good public policy on batteries. That is part of a broader industrial policy we need to have to save our automotive industry. But that is also important to show what we can do. In other words, to do for batteries in the 2020s what we did with Airbus for planes 3 or 4 decades ago. And then obviously we don't only stop at batteries, but we deploy a version of that for green steel, for all the other sectors, both clean tech and, let's say, incumbent industries that need to decarbonize too.
Okay, did either of you want to comment on that, or?
I think you can. It's a nice example that you can play for batteries. You can also play for solar. It's the same, and I hope we're not sitting here in a couple of years from now and say we could have said the same now for hydrogen or for wind power. I think that is a bit the danger we are facing, and we should be very well aware that having industrial jobs in the European Union is also a good benefit for that. And otherwise, we are keeping, again, I mean, that the Commissioner was talking a lot about our dependency on Russian gas. We should also take care that we don't do the same mistake twice with any other country, but that we take our luck, so to say, in their own hands as a European Union and as Europe.
So the one thing that none of us have mentioned so far, which I think is absolutely key, is CBAM.
Okay.
And the whole fact that the CBAM and the carbon border adjustment mechanism actually enables some of these things and enables some of that to stay within the EU. But actually, it's also the ripple effect the CBAM has on other countries. In my role, I've actually done quite a lot of talking to countries in the Middle East, India, China, etc. And one of the key drivers for them looking at CCS and looking at other methods of decarbonisation is the recognition that if they're going to pay that volume of tax at the border, well, they'd rather invest that in their own country in terms of decarbonisation. So for me, I think that CBAM and the ripple effect of that is actually one of the key drivers to some of the third world countries or developing countries actually looking at how do they actually move in this space as well.
Yeah.
And I would add that the example of Japan.
Yes.
And CBAM played a small but critical role at the end of the day in a drastic shift in the Japanese industrial decarbonization policy, which was pretty much absent 10 years ago. There were a lot of things happening inside the METI, so the ministry in Japan, a new generation coming up to power also in the business lobbies, business unions. But part of the thing was CBAM, because for Japan, exporting to Europe is key. It's a key element of their trade policy. And at the end of the day, when they said, okay, we're going to go smart about it. We're going to borrow money now, so 140 billion euros, which for Japan is a lot. We're going to borrow that money in a cheaper manner through green bonds. We're going to invest that money now into the industrial decarbonization of our own industry in Japan. And we're going to pay that money back through a Japanese ETS, which will mirror the EU one, so we won't have to pay CBAM. Mm-hmm. And I think that's that kind of comprehensive policy that looks at public finance, industrial policy, trade policy, climate policy, that aligns them, that we should get inspiration from.
But actually, if you look at the Japanese, they've also taken the CDR component, and they're actually looking at where do they invest in, should we say, low-hanging decarbonisation fruit in other countries, and then they can take some of those credits back and utilise them in Japan as well. So that there's some very interesting mechanisms in their policy.
I'm so sorry. I mean, this is so interesting and like an entire additional discussion, but we're running out of time, and I've promised the audience to ask some questions. Unfortunately, most of these are for the Commission, and we've lost our Commission representative. But I would like to bring up one question just as a final closing question, because it's a subject we've not at all spoken about, and that is consumer clean tech, which is, like heat pumps, EVs, and how the EU can scale that up, because that's really a huge part of making electrification a success. Maybe you're part of the clean tech friendship group in the Parliament, right? That's something you're looking at?
Yeah, 100%. Maybe two quick points there. The first point is we need to restore confidence on the fact that electricity prices will remain reasonable. If we want to convince Europeans, so the average European is, let's say, in his 50s or 60s, to make an investment for the next 2 decades, and to invest, I mean, sometimes, we say a heat pump is, 20,000 euros, and an electric car is 30,000 euros. Okay. Think in terms of month of revenue for the people we're talking about. For people in my constituency, buying an electric car and a heat pump, that's around 50K, both of them combined. That's more than a year of income. They need to have some confidence on the fact that electricity prices will remain reasonable. So that's part of the Affordable Energy Action Plan. And to be honest, making sure that the next politician that thinks we need to increase taxes on electricity gets, blitzed by its constituents, but also by journalists and business unions and trade unions. That would be helpful, at least not to do harm, because we still have politicians that want to increase taxes on electricity, which is exactly the opposite of what we need to do. Second, we need to design public support instruments for the working class. I spent a lot of my time in Parliament, but also working with the Polish minister, Krzysztof Bolesta, on social leasing. What is social leasing? It's being able to deploy at European scale a small French experiment that happened in the month of January 2024, where essentially we allow people that earn less than the median income, so that would be less than 2,000 euros per month in a French context, to access an electric car. They don't need to pay anything upfront. They lease it and they pay between 80 euros per month and 150 euros per month. And we target that scheme for middle income and low income, people who live in rural areas, and we need to drive at least 15 kilometers to go to work. If we do that, then we can have e-mobility for the working class, e-mobility for rural Europeans, It would be a great way to boost demand for new cars in general and new electric cars in particular. That would be great for the European automotive industry. We can put standards to make sure that this is happening and being produced in Europe with European cars, European green steel, European batteries, all of it. And last and not least, we will change the political narrative around the green transformation of our economy. Still, in the mind of a lot of people, including a lot of policymakers in Brussels, they think that the green transition is for the urban elite. I'm sorry, but no. Like we're doing that for the working people of Europe. The working class and the middle class that have been the backbone of our democracy and that are increasingly voting for people that hate democracy. If we want to save democracy, we need to make sure that all the political capital that Europe has invested in the Green Deal actually pays off at the end. And for that, we need a lot of public policy, but also that social leasing scheme deployed at European level with 1 million new people acceding to light battery electric cars every year to show that we mean business and that democracy is about the power of the people, by the people, for the people. And we've been lacking a lot of the for the people side of that discussion in recent years.
On that note, we're running over time, in fact, not just out of time. Thank you so much to our lovely panelists. Really great to hear your thoughts. And thank you to our audience for watching, both in the room and online. Before we say goodbye, let's take a quick look at the results of the poll. The question was about what should take precedence on scaling up clean tech projects. And there we have it. Increased cross-border cooperation is the winning answer among our audience, at least. Thanks again to everyone who joined. Those in the room, feel free to stay on for a drink next door. And see you again soon. Thank you so much.